Hi, I'm Winter Wei. I'm the author of Magic Up. I'm a Toronto-based cartoonist, and this is the True North Country Comic Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to celebrate Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Winter Wei about her comic book series, Magic Up. Based in Toronto, Ontario, Winter Wei is a cartoonist and illustrator. Winter's comics span multiple genres, including speculative short stories, slices of life, horror, fantasy, sci-fi, and journalism comics. Her comic has appeared in Crucial Comix. Before committing to making comics, Winter worked as a UX, user interface design leader, in tech for over a decade. When she's not making comics, you can find Winter making dumplings or playing the cello. Described as a ruthlessly candid account of Cinderella, Magic Up is told in the frame of the traditional Cinderella story that we all know and love, but this version is actually a workplace satire. Imagine the court as a company. This tale follows the royal wedding organizer hired by the king who is working for the worst boss of his life, the prince. Get ready to experience a Cinderella story, but flipped on its head. So without further ado, here's my chat with Winter Wei about our comic book series, Magic Up. So Winter Wei, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thanks, John. Glad to be here.
I appreciate your time. Before we get going with all the questions, I would like to know, what was the first comic book that you read?
The first comics I've read is a Japanese manga called The Rose of Versailles by Ryoko Ikeda. Have you read that one?
I have not. I've heard of a lot of manga, but not that one. Is it very popular?
It is one of the ones that I guess people would say that defined the whole Japanese shoujo manga. It was done in the 70s. It's about the story of Marie Antoinette.
Well, great stuff when you're growing up, but I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
So I think I wanted to talk a little bit about on the meta level, what inspired me. So I grew up in China. So I read a lot of Japanese manga growing up, and I moved to Canada when I was 15. And that's when I started reading some superhero stuff. Later on, I got to read Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. And I feel like that was the book that opened my mind to the possibilities of comics and understanding kind of the inner works of comics. And I'm a nerd, so I like analyzing comics and just understanding the infinite possibilities and all the things. It's basically the world is your oyster, right? You can experiment in so many ways in this medium. And I think this kind of infinite possibility and how you can take the experiments very far, having read a lot of comics in different genres, different cultural backgrounds, different styles, I feel like that is the reason I wanted to create comics.
Scott McCloud's book is very influential and certainly been referenced many times on the podcast. Very
Yes.
cool.
People these days, of course, criticize it for something, but I feel like for someone who wants to get into comics, it is a very eye-opening book for sure.
We recently met up at the Montreal Comic Arts Festival, and you also exhibited at Toronto Comic Arts Festival. I'd like to ask you, how were both of those events for you?
So MCAF was the first time I tabled at any comics festivals. So that was just the first time experience. And I love both. They're very, very different, which is kind of for me, setting expectations for what these kind of comic festivals are like. I love that the MCAF is outdoors. It's more of a street fest vibe. So there are a lot of people you can see that they're not comic fans, but then because they walk by, they come with their kids. So I feel like that could be the entrance for a lot of younger people who get into comics, whereas TCAF is more people come to TCAF only because they're already comic fans. And then they have specific artists that they want to talk to. It's very intense. They're intense in different ways.
I hope the outcome was pleasant for you, though.
It was I met with so many people. And this is the first time I felt I'm part of a community. Not that I've never felt it before, but because this time it's so in person, there's so many creators in such a small space and there's such a tight program. I really felt, wow, this community is so supportive. I get to know a lot of artists I used to look up to, and now I can call them friends. So that was amazing.
Glad to
Yeah.
hear. So we're here talking about your latest comic book called Magic Up. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the story. What is it all about?
It is told in the frame of the Cinderella story that things that we all know, but it was kind of a workplace satire. So if you think about the court as a company, so the world is kind of set in a time where the stories of like Snow White and Sleeping Beauty have set precedents for like royal weddings with a touch of magic. So this is how the story unfolds. We have Palmer, which is, I guess, an expert in advising royal weddings and was hired by the king and met potentially the worst boss of his life, which is the prince. So you have these like different characters in court and essentially like play out the Cinderella story we all know. And in the story, Cinderella is not really part of the story. I think that's kind of playing with a little bit of our perceptions as well as expectation a little bit.
Sort of flips it on its head, I guess, so
Kind
to
of, yeah,
speak.
exactly.
Okay. Now, I got to ask you about the inspiration for the story. You mentioned something about office politics or office environment. Is that something that you said one day when you were working, said, what if? And then it went from there?
Pretty much. I remembered it very clearly. It was a few years ago, it was the Christmas break. I was completely burned out and stressed out from work. I was working at a fairly high profile e-commerce tech company that shall not be named. One day I was just couldn't sleep and I was just like thinking about somehow the Cinderella story came to mind and it suddenly dawned on me of like what a ridiculous way to find someone. You basically go around every single household and ask every woman to like try the shoe and see what fits. And then I'm like, wait a minute, but sometimes the like company make decisions like this, right? So that's how the story came about. I wrote the story in a couple days. Much later on, when I decided to do comics, I started to adapt it in a comic form.
I'd like to switch gears just a wee bit and talk about the tools used to create your art. And perhaps you could walk me through the process of how you made Magic Up.
So I'm actually a huge fan of brush pen on paper. Whenever I get a chance, I'll do that. But for Magic Up, I actually did pretty much everything digitally on Procreate on iPad. I think ultimately it was a decision balancing speed and production quality, and as well as just I feel like the lines that I drew on iPad, because digitally you can erase them, right? So basically what I did was I did my real size like sketch with I handwrite the letters and to make sure that there's enough space for the dialogues on paper. And then I would do redraw the lines on iPad. I'll do like the flat coloring, and then I'll actually erase some of the lines to create that flat sort of screen print effect. And then I would add light shadows afterwards. And also the whole lettering was done in InDesign.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
get the impression talking to some creators who have a day job working on computers that when they go home to do their
Yeah.
cartoon or comic book work, they don't want to see any computer. They'd rather go traditional.
Yeah.
Is that pretty much your situation as well?
Currently, I'm making comics full time. I quit my job a couple years ago. I guess pursue my creative, I guess, potentials, you can say. But I don't know if it's to avoid computers. I love drawing. So I grew up drawing because I read a lot of manga. So I just really love the physical touch. With Magic Up, one of the things I talked about earlier is I read a lot of comics from a variety of genres and styles and cultural backgrounds. So I've always wanted to become the kind of creator that can let form follow function. So I don't really want to have just one style, but the style will follow the story that it tells. One of the things that I decided early on about Magic Up, because it's a Cinderella story, so I want the design to reflect the story in that way. And that includes, I think, making it reads like illuminated manuscript from the medieval time, if you will. So that it's not just the setting of the story, but also kind of make the satire work a little bit better. So everything from the brushstroke and the color choices, and also the 9 grid panel of the page were all chosen to serve that purpose. So that's just one of a little bit of design decisions before putting pen on paper kind of thing. Yeah.
Now, I was reading your bio online. It says that you worked as a UX, user interface design leader in tech for over a decade. I want to
Mhm.
ask you, how did that effort translate to making comic books and illustration?
Yeah, so in my mind, I see a huge parallel between UX, user experience, and comics. So in UX, we always talk about, helping the user to user interface. Obviously, the best thing you can achieve with your design is that you don't really need a manual or instructions, right? Like the interface and then the experience is intuitive and humane enough that the user can figure out on their own and they derive some kind of joy or some kind of value from using your product. And comics, I think, is the same thing. Like we use tools such as your lines, composition, layout, even where you place a speech bubble. All of these things are there to help the reader read the story. So I think there's a lot of things that can be translated, not necessarily like hard skills, but I think the mindsets that how you are thinking about guiding the reader through reading the comics.
From my sort of limited knowledge of user interface, it's how to guide the user in a certain flow and manner. I guess a similar thing could be said about comic books from panel to panel, and then understanding you get from panel 1 to panel 28. And did you understand the story or the flow of it? I guess that sort of thing. Is that
That's right.
correct?
That's exactly it. And also, on the other hand, there is kind of an interaction, right? Like, even though reading comics can be seen as a very passive activity, but it's not really, right? When the readers is reading the comics, there is a internal dialogues going on. They have certain expectations that's either met or not met. And similarly, in UX, people talk about storytelling all the time as well, because they have a task that they have to complete. So they're kind of going through a story of their own by trying to complete that task.
Now, we were talking about the Montreal Comic Arts Festival and the Toronto Comic Arts Festival. Do you have plans to attend any other events to promote your book this year?
Yeah, I'm going to Winnipeg for the Prairie Comic Festival in September. That's the next one.
Yes, I was
Yeah.
there last year. Definitely
Yeah, how
recommend
was
it.
it?
Very good. It's intimate. Yeah, it's a different audience as well. And certainly people there are very close knit. And I think it's a very welcoming environment. Certainly, I'm
Mm.
sure you'll have a great time there.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I've never been to Winnipeg, so I'm like double excited.
Now,
Yeah.
we're talking about Magic Up here for this
Mhm.
discussion. I'm wondering, do you have any other projects on the go that you can talk about?
Yeah, recently just finished a journalism comic piece that is looking to be published this fall. It's about the recent history of queer censorship in Toronto. And at the meantime, I'm actually trying to work on a one-shot mini comic based on, so my friend Ian Williams wrote a action fantasy based in Toronto called Chaos Callings. So I'm just adapting one of the fight scenes in the book into like I think 8 to 10 page mini comics.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot on the go, not only
Yes,
today, but tomorrow. Wondering,
yes.
where should people go online to keep in touch with you and find out what you're doing?
Two main places is one is my website, it's winterwei.com. And the other one that I update a bit more frequently is my Instagram, which is winterweiX.
Thanks to Winter for the chat. You can discover more about Winter Wei online at winterwei.com and on Instagram at winterweiX. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations about creators making comic books and graphic novels. And when you're there, remember to subscribe, so you'll be able to get all these interviews and news on a regular basis. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media platforms, and you can send any and all feedback to john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2026.